Hello everyone, this will be chapter 18 of Regular Boy Daniel Wayne, written by Diamond Rosie and read by Insect Overlord. This chapter is titled Jason Gets the Talk. Red Hood was having a regular patrol, about as regular as it got in the dark hours of Crime Alley. Muggings, robberies, human laundering, murder, nothing out of the ordinary. Seems like his one day off wouldn't uproot his position as the crime lord of Crime Alley. Who knew? He had his men stationed around the area to intervene if they could, or alert him of any matter that may need to be taken care of. Compared to other nights, things were going incredibly smoothly. Minimal deaths and minimal damages, allowing himself to just be a shadow on the rooftops. Red Hood surveyed the area. Despite the relatively easy night, something made his chest churn, and the hair on his neck stood on edge. A sense of danger and foreboding drenched the air around Red Hood. Drifting through each channel of his comms to check any disturbances, he was surprised to find everything in the area clear. The feeling in the air seemed to thicken by the second. Even the night wind seemed to stop in its tracks at the unknown danger. The feeling, or the source it was coming from, seemed conflicted. It told him to run away, that he was no match for whatever was approaching. His feet felt iron-bound to the floor he stood on. At the same time, he felt a need to approach, to gauge and welcome him. Him? Red Hood, never one to back down from a fight or from curiosity, made his way to the source. How did he know where to find the source? There was a strange magnetic pull that seemed to serve as an internal GPS for Red Hood to find him. Who was him? Nearly into the burrows, Red Hood deserted the rooftops to droop down hard onto the cement floor. Letting his loud descent announce his presence, he followed the pull as it got stronger like a magnet. All the while, the strange feeling of reverence piled into an entirely different feeling of fear. Something seemed to supply him with the unquestionable knowledge that this person, whoever he was powerful. Immeasurably so. Forcing one foot in front of another, not sure what he was heading towards, Red Hood turned the street corner. Hovering right above the ground was... Red Hood wasn't sure what he was. There was a faint whisper in the back of his mind, though it was stuffed away far in the crevices hidden beneath the pit rage. The thing, the whisper, tried to tell him what it was, had white hair that drifted around his head. The faintest hint of a glowing ring surrounding it was overshadowed by the little green glow the creature seemed to give off. The eyes that bored through Red Hood's helmet were large and green. It reminded Jason of the Lazarus pit in its toxic glow, but he registered that the green was different, purer. On his forehead was a crystal, like shards that seemed to protrude from his pale, ghostly skin. Smaller crystals that were near his brow line gathered together to form cusps that held back his hair. The blue hue of the crystals almost made it seem like it was an unmelting formation of ice. The creature, the whisper, was louder, but Jason still couldn't decipher what it was trying to tell him. Was wearing a black and white suit, with a P stylized on his chest. The creature was already looking in Red Hood's direction before he turned into the street, but his head tilted to the side as if he hadn't been expecting him. The strange feeling in Jason's chest twisted in apprehension. The buildings and structures around them faded from Jason's mind, and all he could focus on was the creature. Colors warped around him, green tilted in his vision. Jason tried to fight it, but it was different from the pit madness he was used to, and he wasn't sure he could control it. It gripped at his mind, the green protruding into it like spores. The creature almost seemed to blurt out, "Jason?" and the green vanished. The colors of his surroundings were the familiar grays and darks. His heart beat in his chest. An immediate sense of relief flooded through him, the nerves from before evaporating. Jason couldn't help but think the voice sounded familiar. He would have entertained the thought more if the whisper hadn't gotten louder. He could almost hear it now. Phantom. The creature drifted closer to him with more ease than Aquaman swam through his underwater castle. He studied Jason appraisingly, or rather the area around him. Trying to gather his bearings, Red Hood squared his shoulders. Who are you? It was supposed to be a demand for Phantom, the entity that had figured out his secret identity on sight. Without the voice modulator, he would have sounded more like a mystified child. The being seemed to remember himself at the question. The quiet, distant whisper turned into incessant buzzing. The creature drifted a reasonable distance away, still at arm's length, but no longer in Jason's breathing space. Normally, the invasion of personal space would have earned the trespasser at least a punch to the gut, but for some reason, Jason didn't mind the intrusion. Sorry, the creature chuckled apologetically. The buzzing went silent at his voice. I'm Phantom. Phantom. Wherever the whispers were coming from preened at the name. Danny told me I should talk to you. You know, ghost too. He looked at Jason questioningly. Jason, not Red Hood. Kinda ghost? You're a ghost? Jason asked curiously. Red Hood persona long forgotten. Phantom hovered around him, trying to gauge something Jason couldn't understand. Yep, he said absent-mindedly. Hey, what's all this? Phantom gestured around him. Jason should have bluffed and pretended that he knows to try to get more information out of this alleged ghost. I don't know what you're talking about. The words were out of his mouth before he could think. That only seemed to confuse Phantom even more. Carefully, he reached a single-gloved hand out. Jason stood still, as if to make a clear trajectory to his shoulder. The next moment blurred into a flurry of greens, purples, and blues that weren't there, his mind racing to keep up. He had pushed the pits away. How had it managed to take hold of him so quickly? He needed to fight it off before he did something unspeakable again. Fight it off, Jason. His vision blurred again, taking his consciousness with it. Phantom said something. Jason tried to hear his words, but the green was blinding, overshadowing the purples and blues from before. If Jason had the time to notice it, he might have been surprised by the lack of aggression and pure anger that usually accompanied the green. He tried to grasp for his consciousness, but it slipped away like a squirming fish. When Jason opened his eyes, he was accosted by an all-too-familiar brown that had once been white. He blinked and rubbed his face absent-mindedly, hand dragging across his clammy forehead and cheek. Forehead and cheek? Where had his helmet gone? He was on patrol, then he met Phantom, but how come he was in his apartment lying on his sofa helmetless? Why was he sweaty? Jason pushed himself up. Despite all the confusion and burning questions, he didn't feel alarmed. Jason was no stranger to keeping a level head under stressful circumstances, but whatever his head was doing, it had forgone level. Jason tried to gather his thoughts, and the vision of green rushed to his memory like a dog to a stick. He was calm, the sort of calm that made him feel lethargic, like right after a stressful mission. The kind of calm that bats never felt, because there was always something. The next case, the next bust, the next Arkham breakout. But even that didn't seem to break the even stream of nothing in Jason's brain. The effect seemed to travel through his whole body. Jason, for the first time since he had dug himself out of his own grave, felt well rested, relaxed even. There was an air about the apartment that seemed to reflect Jason's internal mood. It reminded him of his birthdays in the manor, back when he still had birthdays in the manor. Alfred would make all his favorite food. Bruce would ask what he felt like doing today, and when Jason would say the most outrageous thing, Bruce would agree without question. Dick would grumble about being there, but he would always bring Jason a gift. But today wasn't his birthday, and he wasn't in the manor. Jason didn't get birthdays in the manor anymore. It took Jason longer than it should have to realize there was something in the kitchen. There was the light clinking of pots and pans and the occasional running of water. Making his footsteps as light as possible, Jason approached the kitchen, turning around the wall that was blocking his view. Jason blinked in surprise at the sight before him. Phantom was there, busying himself with something on the stove, ingredients and spices floating around him like gravity was a recommendation. Glasses full of water hovered around the counter, not spilling, and empty bowls waited within hand's reach of Phantom, but not resting on any surface. Maybe Jason should have been alarmed. There was an unknown in his house, making himself fully at home in his kitchen. Jason was still sweating like he had run a marathon, and his helmet had been removed, all without him knowing how or why, but every danger response he had learned in his life seemed to be on vacation. The air of ease and calmness made no move of disappearing, and Jason couldn't find it in himself to be wary of the strange ghost creature. He cleared his throat lightly, bringing attention to himself. "What are you doing?" Phantom turned to him, pleasantly surprised to see him coming into the doorway. "You're up," he cheered lightly, floating closer to Jason. Looks like you still haven't broken through your fever yet." "Fever? I don't have a fever," Jason denied, despite the clamminess and sweat slipping down his forehead. Phantom gave him an unimpressed look. "I made some food. It should help you recover faster." He floated back to the pan, scraping the substance into the bowl. The glass of water floated behind him to the dining table as Jason could only watch the sight. Setting the bowl down, Phantom turned to Jason, his own words interrupted by a clarifying blink. "You, don't mind that I used your stuff, right? Kinda late to be asking that, don't you think?" Jason laughed lightly, surprised by his own leniency. "Sorry," Phantom apologized shyly. You should eat, though." Jason approached the food carefully. "What is it?" "Veggie soup. It's a little unconventional, but I did what I could from your ingredients." A piece of broccoli bounced in the buoyancy of the soup, accompanied by evenly sized carrot slices and cabbage that Jason didn't remember buying. There was a faint green tinge to the soup, probably from the assortment of greens in it. "How long was I out?" Jason looked up at the floating ghost. This wasn't exactly something you could whip up in a few minutes. "About 2 hours, he said, drifting closer to the floor. "You passed out in the street, and I brought you back to your apartment. No one saw you, though. I made us invisible." 2 whole hours? "You took my helmet off." Jason sat at the table, still watching the ghost. "I mean, it looked kind of uncomfortable." Phantom shrugged. "Besides, you already knew that I knew who you were." He took a seat opposite of Jason. Jason eyed him suspiciously. "How did you know that I was Red Hood?" Phantom was about to answer without much fanfare, but he stopped himself. "I'll only answer if you eat your soup," he said pointedly. "How do I know you didn't poison this or something?" He mixed the soup around with his spoon. It was only the bat training that had been ingrained into his DNA that made him ask. Jason wasn't sure why he was so comfortable and trusting of Phantom. Sure, Danny had mentioned him, and they were friends, but that shouldn't be enough to make Jason trust him. Phantom looked like he hadn't been expecting that question, and seemed unsure about how to answer. "I can take a bite of it first," he offered. Based on what Danny had said about Phantom, he had been human before he died, even though he didn't look so human now. How possible would it be that if there was a substance in his soup that would affect him as a human and not Phantom as a ghost? If Phantom was already a ghost, what would he get out of killing Jason? But something in his chest made him believe Phantom, despite all rationality. Not wanting to seem like he was giving in too easily, he pushed the bowl towards the ghost. Phantom took an easy spoonful of it, under Jason's watchful gaze. Swallowing it, Phantom looked away thoughtfully. "I think it needs more salt," he mumbled. Jason took a small sip, surprised to find it was actually quite tasty. There was an ingredient that Jason couldn't recognize right away, but he knew he'd tasted it before. The warmth felt good against the inside of his throat and warmed up his whole body. "Answer my question." He pointed a spoon at Phantom. "How did you know who I was, or where I lived for that matter?" I asked Danny for your address earlier. I was gonna make my way over here to find you, but you found me first." Jason wordlessly accepted the salt shaker from Phantom. And about the identity thing, it was pretty obvious. Jason bristled at that, but Phantom quickly followed up. "For ghosts," he defended. "It's easier for ghosts just 'cause everyone is pretty distinctive by their ecto signature. Humans have one too, but it's a little harder to notice than it is for ghosts." The explanation didn't seem to explain anything away. Ecto signature? Phantom took a steadying huff of air that he probably didn't need. "You really don't know anything, huh?" he said to himself. He turned to Jason, his voice delicately broaching the topic. "Are you aware that you died?" Jason coughed in surprise at the question. "What?" he choked, gathering his bearings. "What kind of question is that?" "Do you know if you have?" Phantom pressed urgently. "Yeah," he shrugged. If Phantom was already a ghost, no reason to hide this from him. "I was buried and everything." He took a bite of broccoli. Phantom seemed to relax at the admission. "Okay, that makes things a lot easier." He drifted into his seat. "So you're like part ghost. Not exactly half, judging by the fact you didn't know I was a ghost. Which means your core is still pretty underdeveloped, but still, like, kinda ghostly?" Jason ogled at him. He gestured to himself. "Part ghost?" Phantom nodded earnestly. "Wow," he laughed sardonically. "And here I was, thinking I was a zombie." "Oh no, zombies are completely different," Phantom explained earnestly. "The media interpretation kinda does them dirty, but honestly, their ghosts aren't all that accurate either." Jason stared at him. "You've met zombies?" "Zombies, ghosts, apparitions, sprites, vampires, mermaids. I could go on, but I think you got the idea." Phantom looked at Jason, almost empty bowl of soup. "Do you feel any better now?" Deciding he didn't want to talk about the supernatural more than he had to, Jason introspected on his alleged fever. "I'm not sweating as much," he started. "My head feels clearer." Clearer than he remembered it feeling in a long time. "Okay, I was worried the dosage was too small since, by the looks of it, you've had it for a while now." Phantom nodded to himself. "Dosage?" Jason asked, alarmed. "Of what?" "Of ectoplasm." "Effin' what? Did Jason just consume a whole bowl of some random medicine? Was he drugged?" "Oh, crap, I forgot to tell you about that." Phantom tried to start placatingly. "Okay, so ectoplasm is, it's basically what ghosts are made out of." "Wait, I never explained that either." Okay. Ghosts are beings that have died surrounded by a lot of emotion, usually their own, but it can be someone else's too. Ring a bell? Well, being tortured by your mentor's arch nemesis might make a lot of emotions. Jason was definitely feeling a lot of emotions when he came out of his grave. Sometimes, but not all the time, death is unnatural and maybe a little brutal. If not, it can be there was something left unfinished. "I think I recall," Jason huffed. "What does this have to do with you drugging my soup?" "Right, so the emotion that a freshly dead person emits turns into ectoplasm. It's like concentrated emotion, and if there's enough of it, then the ectoplasm helps create a core to make a ghost. If there's not enough, then the ghost won't form. Most often, but not always, ghosts require some time post-death to find enough ectoplasm to sustain themselves for the rest of their death." Phantom paused to see if Jason was following along. Ghost formation ectoplasm is different from the ectoplasm found in nature. Environmental ectoplasm usually isn't strong enough to sustain core development, but it helps create a healthy ghost. Core? Oh, right, sorry. So ghost formation ectoplasm has to make the core. Since ghosts don't have conventional organs, it serves as the heart, brain, and soul of the ghost. As you can imagine, it's pretty important, and is heavily influenced by the emotions at death. Each ghost has distinctly different cores, which is where ectosignatures come from. Jason filtered through the information, trying to understand. So you think I'm a ghost. Jason knew better than to take any one source of information without cross-checking it with something else. Whatever inside of him that was causing his irrational trust of Phantom and the unusual calmness of the whole situation, including being drugged, seemed to drink up the information like it made everything click together. Part ghost, Phantom corrected. They're not common, but there are a few. I think in your case the most accurate term would be liminal. You visited both sides of the veil, but you're still pretty firmly living. How do I know you're not making this all up? Well, Phantom rubbed the back of his neck nervously. The soup would have killed you if you weren't already at least a little dead. Jason's jaw dropped at the admission, but Phantom continued before he could say anything. But I already knew you were, liminal. So the chances of you dying were very slim. I even made the dosage of ectoplasm really low in case you couldn't take it, he defended. Besides, whatever that creepy thing haunting you was couldn't have stayed so long on a human without killing them. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Jason screamed. Yes? Jason took a calming breath. He thought back to the conversation he had with Danny at the diner in Metropolis. Danny had admitted that he had been friends with Phantom before he died, and after too. By the sound of it, they were pretty close, so it wasn't a wild assumption that Danny had told Phantom about him. Phantom had said earlier that Danny had given him Jason's address, as well as sending him to talk to Jason about his apparent liminalness. You're friends with Danny, right? He was the one that told you to come here? Phantom seemed surprised at the change of topic, but nodded in confirmation anyway. Now that Jason was getting a good look at his face, and Phantom had decided to let his wispy tail form into legs and pace around as he spoke, there was a strange familiarity about his face. Phantom was the same height as Danny, but considering they seemed around the same age, it wasn't too strange. The same build, muscle proportions, and uncanny facial features weren't so easy to explain. If it weren't for Dr. Kyle's case, Jason might have thought they were twins. Phantom's eyes weren't the same blue-gray Danny's were, instead of vivid green, and his hair was an anti-gravity white instead of Danny's much more gravity-abiding black. Thinking that Danny was somehow Phantom seemed almost illogical. The thing that kept whispering his core seemed to like them both, but Danny had admitted to having many ghost friends, so maybe it was some kind of side effect of hanging out with the undead? Perhaps the rationality was in the irrationality. Gosh dang it, he was starting to sound like Constantine. Are you going to tell him that I'm Red Hood? Jason asked instead. Phantom was thoughtful before speaking. He already knows, he admitted quietly. He knows? Jason spluttered. He knows what? That Bruce is Batman, Dick is Nightwing, and you're Red Hood. Most of the others, too. He paused. Like I said, secret identities don't mean much to ghosts, so it's not like he outed you guys to me. I would have known anyway. Jason blinked in surprise. Danny knew? Jason thought back to how quickly he managed to find out Clark had super hearing. Sure, Clark had started freaking out, but even Jason hadn't figured out why before Danny came clean. Jason had only spent one day with the kid, separate from how much everyone else kept talking about him, and he couldn't find it in himself to be surprised. How come he doesn't say anything about it? Phantom shrugged. Dunno. Jason could tell he was lying. He wasn't sure how, but the same thing that told Jason to trust him seemed pretty disappointed at the fact. Letting subject change again. So you put ectoplasm in my soup. Jason raised a brow. Want to explain what that was about? Well, I explained how ghosts need environmental ectoplasm to stabilize themselves. Phantom started, happy to change the topic. Yeah, so whatever evio ecto you happened to find was, gross and decrepit, and it was disturbing your homeostasis, basically. Taking straight ghost shots of ectoplasm can be kinda gross. Most ghosts just absorb it, which you can't do because you're not a ghost enough, or they mix it with their food. The one I gave you was medical grade because, believe me, you need it. I'm sure you're starting to feel the difference by now. Was he talking about the pit rage? Did Phantom just cure the pit rage? This whole time, Jason just needed some medicine? Was the universe enjoying making a fool out of him? By the way, Phantom said cheekily, mind telling me where you got your live juice from? Because it's not exactly authorized for public use. Or any use, honestly. The Lazarus Pit? I can't tell you, Jason said firmly. Like you're cursed to never speak about it, or you're choosing not to tell me? Phantom asked, concerned. Jason gave him a judgmental look. I'm choosing. Oh, okay, Phantom said, relieved, but not pushing the topic. So, are we good here? 'Cause I can leave. Oh, no you don't. You're staying until I get all my questions answered. Jason grabbed him by the arm as he was trying to leave. Phantom grimaced, but abided by his request. Do you know a guy named Johnny 13? Phantom looked at him, confused. Yeah? He seems like a bad influence. Phantom balked at him. Does he hang around Danny a lot? Jason interrogated. Johnny is not a bad influence, Phantom huffed. Jason peered at him. You're friends with him too, aren't you? He pointed an accusatory finger at the ghost. This concludes Chapter 18 of Regular Boy Daniel Wayne. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I was very impressed with this chapter. The way that the author wrote Jason's point of view for meeting Phantom and stuff, I mean, I was stunned. That was beautiful writing. So, very good job on this, Diamond Rosie. The next chapter should hopefully be up soon, and thank you so much for listening.